That kind of leads to the next question, which is audience. So who do you think of when you're making your animation, and in what context do you see it playing out? General thoughts about audience.
Should we get me first?
Yeah. Well, I think that when I have my audiences are typically clients in my day-to-day work, and so I'm thinking about their needs. I'm thinking about pushing my agenda on them subtly, or maybe not subtly, and I'm thinking about who's watching the show I'm doing a promo series for, or something like that. What the demographic is, and it's all that kind of thing. And then when I switch over to making something for myself, I'm my audience 100%. It's my opportunity when I do a film outside of work. It's my opportunity to do something without any intervention from anybody, except for the collaboration that I might do with with audio and with other people who, But it's kind of my chance to play God a little bit, because in day to day I'm always going to have those peers above me of studio executive, channel executive, all the people who have to see things, and then you have that kind of feeling of being watered down by the end of a project typically, and it's hard to avoid. And so I guess my audience on that side it's me. It's kind of, I get a little bit selfish about it when I do my animated films, and I just think purely about what I would like to see.
It's interesting because I never articulate that idea of it being for me, but I do realize I think that I want it to be for someone just a bit smarter than me. It's like this. It's actually something I'm stealing from Umberto Eco, that he talks about this concept of like the perfect audience, who would not be somebody who isn't in your vein, but somebody who actually has super high expectations, and which is something that's very interesting. Is that I think of other animators in the world, and the independent animation community really is a global community, which is kind of interesting. And but we're never like shocked by anything we see of each other's, because we're all like, yeah, I understand why you did that. Like, because we're all trying to kind of make this. I think trying to make important work. So for me, an audience is like smart, complex adults. Is what I hope, and it is funny though. I do think about limits. New film that I'm working on now starts off with very explicit nudity, and then the characters put on their clothes, and then you don't see that again. Mm-hmm. And I like that as an intellectual idea, but I realized it could limit what happens with the film. I recently, I don't know if anyone here has seen Wuthering Heights, which it's a beautiful film, but bad stuff happens to animals. So whether that's worth it, But so to me, like an audience is, I don't think that my films will ever be in cineplexes, but I do really believe in cinema. I believe in people gathering together to see, and that's something. The only thing I find when I feel like where I can get really assholey in is when someone comes up to me and says, "Chris, I want to see your film. Is there some way I can see it on the internet?" Yeah. And I'm like, "No." And so, but I do like the idea of assembly, and I do like the idea of, basically people give me a bit of trust, but it's up to me to deliver.
Before we move on, last night after the local premiere of Consuming Spirits, showing again today at 3 o'clock, you said something about kind of the context for where your work is seen, and your experience recently with your new film, and the difference between animation festivals and non-animation festivals.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's something that the film has primarily been played in runs and in theaters that play live action films. So it hasn't. Audible was the only animation festival it's shown in so far. So, which is interesting, and the only place that gave it a terrible review, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, on that subject, I kind of like audiences that come or to be in a program with live action films,
yeah.
Or to be a short in front of a live action feature at festivals, and to play at festivals that are primarily live action festivals, because the audiences come with different expectations when they come to see animation, and in particular, it has to do with the ingenuity of the technique, maybe the new technology that people are using, and the questions tend to be, what software did you use, and that kind of thing, which gets to be a little repetitive and you don't really want to talk about it anymore. I have a friend who's Dutch who answers that question by saying, all of the software on my computer. Just because he's been asked it so many times. And his films are technically innovative, and so he's bound to get asked the question. But just to go back to the essential idea of the audience, it's been kind of an interesting thing to think about how it evolves. When I first started shooting animation, it was with a Super 8 camera in a barn in Wisconsin with a friend of mine. We wore light white lab jackets and stayed up all night because we could control the light. We built sets in the barn and mimicked Norman McLaren films and jumped 3,000 times drinking Dr. Pepper and throwing up at dawn through the exertion. And that was the most fun I've ever had doing animation because we were the audience that we were making the films for. There was no idea that there should be or could be an audience. We were just going to watch. We waited for the film to come back from the lab, and then we watched it, and we looked at what worked and what didn't, and then we went back into the laboratory and made more. And then you start getting opinions from your friends who say, why don't you send these things to festivals? And you say, oh, there's festivals? And then you send them to festivals and they don't get accepted. And then you start getting accepted into festivals, and then you start to meet this subculture of animators from around the world that Chris is talking about, and they become the people that you're thinking about when you're making your films because you like their films a lot and you want to make films that please them because they inspired you, and then it becomes this little dialogue through films that are being made at festivals, and sometimes conflict and arguments that are being made through films. And as to the internet question, I've reached the point where I have a kind of a system where I make a film, send it to a certain number of festivals, and then I have a distributor now who handles my films in Germany, and he tries to get them on broadcast venues, and there's about 30 of them in the world for short films. A lot are in Europe and Australia and Japan. But that has always been the way that I thought I wanted my films to be seen. And then with this Rooster film, because the Sundance Festival recruited some filmmakers to do a collaboration with YouTube during the course of the festival, I submitted my film just to see what would happen. And over the course of 10 days, 115,000 people presumably watched my film on YouTube. And I thought, wow. I wonder if 115,000 people have seen any of my films. And this YouTube thing seems to work. People are watching the films. And then there's a profit-sharing thing where if they attach advertising to it, you get money for it as well. So I think that the internet thing is, it sounds crazy to say it, that it's new, but to me it's starting to seem like a legitimate vehicle maybe for circumventing festivals and broadcast distribution and having a direct audience of people that are, well, I don't know how serious they are about watching your film, but at least they're watching it.
Say one quick thing that adds that. Paul Furlinger, who's another experimental filmmaker, he articulated something really interesting to me where he said, the difference between watching a film on the internet is you are a reader, not a viewer. Mm-hmm. And so that whole idea, like when you read a book, even though there's all this stuff happening, you're just calmly reading it. You're not like, whereas you're in the cinema. So it was kind of interesting, but it made me think about that.
Yeah. Audience. I mean, audiences are kind of what it's all about. You make things because you want to show them to people, but audiences are also really terrifying, and how how a piece is received really depends on the audience too. You can show something to an audience that's like really cold and just doesn't accept it, or you can show it to an audience where you can just feel the energy and they really get into it, and it's so. In the online stuff, of course, your audience is completely invisible, and it's not the same experience. They're not sharing that reception of the movie with others necessarily. And then there's the whole comment thing too, which can be extremely ego-depleting, sometimes depleting depending on what some adolescent person or whatever comments about your piece. But yeah, I mean, audiences are tough. It's hard to even find them and hard to even know what that. I mean, it's just being able to experience that with a piece of yours with a good audience is like there's just nothing in the world like it. But also experiencing a piece of yours with an audience that just isn't getting it is also probably the most ego-depleting thing there is too. So.
Very briefly, just to respond to what Chris said about audience too, is I am an audience member of films, and I see two people who I see at every film that I go to, here at the Walker or at the Trilon, people that love art films and love all films. And to be a part of that audience and to be in conversation with those obsessive compulsive people that have to see all of these films and then talk about them in a bar with you afterwards, that's the kind of audience I would want to be seeing my films as well, the kind of audience that I participate in, and that's different than the internet, because that's about church in a way, that's about going into a public space and being a part of something larger than the private experience of you and the thing.
Okay, well,